roadmap a little bit for you right here. I'll be going over some resolutional analysis, criteria for winning the round, a plan provided by the affirmation, and our 3 advantages to this round. Now then, starting to my speech. First off, I'd like to thank everyone for making it here today, judges, opponents, partner, peanut gallery for making this round. Really excited to be in the semifinals. Congratulate our opponents for being here and making it too. Okay, to get right into it, the resolution reads, the United States should expand its development and use of nuclear power. We're defining the United States as the United States federal government. Expand its development, we're doing government grants for research and for use of nuclear power. We're having government loan subsidies for companies that want to construct. Now, the criterion for this round should really be net benefits. Whoever at the end of the round has proven that their case, through all of its possible disadvantages, comes out and provides the best good, the net benefits. That should be what the round is decided on. Now then, moving into our plan. Our plan is, through normal means, Congress will pass additional grants for the development of 4th generation, or commonly known IFR reactors, and provide for more loan subsidies for companies that create nuclear reactors.
Yes. Can you briefly explain which element are you using and kind of what is a 4th generation reactor?
Okay, 4th generation reactor. Okay, for the longest time after 1984, and I'll go more into this, the United States froze development of nuclear power. Now, what we're currently stuck with is a 3rd generation reactor, which is effectively just, it uses the fuel once, it does it pretty efficiently, but afterwards there's a lot of fuel that's basically dumped afterwards that isn't necessarily used. Now, IFR reactors, what they do, and developed in France, and what they're able to do is that they're able to use plutonium-239, which is far more efficient fuel, and what's able to do is use the fuel once, then it can recycle it again and again and again and again, and it reduces the amount of waste at the end that is effectively unusable by 90%, only 10% of the waste right now. That is what an IFR reactor is. Now then, to move in, our first advantage to this plan, which is clean energy. My subpoint A here is that nuclear energy is much cleaner than we currently see of the status quo energy plants. What we currently see right now is that we see coal power, we see oil power, we see things that aren't clean, things that both pollute simply the air with large amounts of carbon dioxide leading to global warming, but as well we see other things. We see coal has to take the tops off the mountains, they destroy ecosystems, oil destroys ecosystems. We can see that with the BP oil spill. Currently, right now, we do not see it as clean, and as well we see that so what effectively we see here is that nuclear research, not only is nuclear power a clean alternative energy, but it is much more efficient, we see, than other forms of alternative energy. Now then, moving on to this as well, nuclear research was stopped in 1984. After the Chernobyl incident, a large move was made in the Senate to say, look, this stuff can't be safe. We can't possibly invest more time and development into it. And it froze research, and that is why America is behind right now in this clean energy race. Which leads me to my subpoint B here, is that by offering these grants for research of the IFR reactors, and for providing loan subsidies for the construction of these reactors that can be developed, it's been done before in France, they do exist, and by simply encouraging nuclear power now, you'll see that more of this nuclear development and more of this nuclear power will become prominent in the United States. This leads me to my subpoint C, which is the impacts here. First off, you see with more nuclear power and more clean energy, we see less harm to the environment. We see this through simply the immediate term effect of no more oil. We see less oil spills. We see less destruction of the environment for coal drilling. We see less carbon dioxide in the air, which leads me to another impact, which is less carbon dioxide. Basically, what this means is that we have a cleaner environment, and this means less global warming. We want to reduce global warming. It's important because global warming screws up ecosystems, which screws up the entire planet. So we want to stop this very much. Now then, this leads me into my second advantage, which is a domination of the nuclear economy in the world. Now then, my subpoint A here is that currently what we see is because development was frozen in the United States, Japan controls the manufacturing. Japan is currently the only country in the world that has the full capabilities of industrial infrastructure to be able to create a key part of nuclear reactors, and this is the core. The core of the nuclear reactor that keeps the fuel, that is immediately within the vicinity of the fuel and keeps it from linking. Japan controls this. They only produce 2 a year because they have this control and they use it. France, on the other hand, controls of the research and development and use of it because they made the IFR reactors. They are the farthest ahead because we're not making any effort right now in the status quo to keep up with them. Which leads me to my subpoint here, B here, which is a link. By putting more money into this energy race, by trying to put more money into both the construction to get the more use of the United States, into the development to try and get the development, and by having more loans, this creates an infrastructure because of this government rush. You see here that it's going to lead to this gap finally shortening and the United States being able to keep up and compete with these countries. Which leads me to my subpoint C here. Once we can compete with these countries, this gives us a huge advantage to compete with them in manufacturing in the global economy. This means an incredible export to have. As well, it means more soft power because once we gain this importance of research and development and manufacturing in the world, like Japan and France is able to use that to keep ahead in the clean energy race and to control world economies for clean energy, we gain that importance too now, and we are now able to claim that soft power for ourselves. Now then, my third advantage to the affirmations plan here, which is American hegemony. My subpoint A here is that America currently has a large weakness for needing energy supplies. We take millions of gallons of oil daily from the Middle East to bring them over here and to fund oil. And this is bad because what it means is when we're trying to negotiate with these countries, it gives us less leverage because we can't actually say, well, we're just going to put sanctions, because as we saw during the OPEC crisis, if they cut off oil, we hurt more than they do. Okay, as well, natural gas that comes from other countries, we rely on that. My subpoint B here is that America doesn't, that in promoting this alternative energy and we have an alternative, we don't have to rely on this source. Uranium is spread equally around the globe. There's no concentration. It's found in Wyoming and Montana, so it doesn't apply. Now then, my impacts here is that through this more hegemony, not having this weakness anymore to these countries that oftentimes don't like us in the Middle East, we're able to gain more soft power. Through this soft power of American hegemony, we have less wars, and I thank you very much for listening to my speech. Please vote for the affirmation of this round.
Just to go down a little bit, I have 4 off-case arguments. Yes, I need to find where all of my off-case arguments are, but I have 4 off-case arguments. There we go. It took me a little bit. So I have 4 off-case arguments, and then I'm just going to go straight down the case. So, without further ado, let me begin. Okay, so now on disadvantage 1 is a meltdown disadvantage. And that is, our A subpoint is plutonium is relatively unstable. It's one of those elements that is fairly unstable, and therefore any sort of nuclear reaction involving it will run the risk of a meltdown, specifically if we are introducing plutonium wide scale for the first time throughout the United States. Like, we've developed enough safeguards to where uranium is fairly safe, but now since we're switching over to an entirely new fuel, an entirely new element, then what we are risking is further destabilization or further meltdowns of nuclear plants. So the B subpoint, the link, is that their plan is increasing the reliance on plutonium energy, and then so our internal link, our C impact, or our C point, is that because they're increasing their reliance, they're increasing the probability of a meltdown with plutonium. And then so our impacts on that is that it's extremely detrimental to the environment and the people living around these nuclear plants for a meltdown. The reason why we shut down funding immediately after Chernobyl was because the 50,000 or so people that lived in that city no longer live there. You cannot inhabit Chernobyl because of the issue with the nuclear meltdown that happened in the 1980s. Additionally, radiation kills lots and lots of species. Kills lots and lots of different animals. Yes?
Oh, I'm sorry, just a point of clarification before you further around Chernobyl was in like 1989, so it's more than 1990s, it's happening just before this gets any further.
Okay.
Yeah.
Alright. Well, okay, so either way, we're still facing meltdown, so the environment will be detrimentally affected because when you release a lot of radiation into the environment, it gets in the water, it adversely affects the water. The water is, for one thing, not drinkable, so lots of people lose their water supply and go thirsty. But additionally, lots of species die and develop various forms of cancer, and so you are completely degrading the environment when you rely on unstable elements for nuclear reaction, as well as threatening people that live around those areas. Our second disadvantage is terrorist attack disadvantage, and our ASA point is that plants that have an unstable reaction are prime targets for terrorist activity, for some sort of attack by a non-governmental organization. They're pretty ideal because one bomb, one attack could lead to widespread devastation, and our BISA point is they're increasing the reliance on an unstable element. The C internal link is this increases the probability of terrorist attack, of the theory that we could be attacked with nuclear technology. And our DSA point, our impacts, is that extend cross-supply. The impacts for the first disadvantage, because it's very similar to a meltdown, and additionally, it is a little bit worse because when they do it, they do it for the maximum amount of damage. Meltdowns don't necessarily have the maximum amount of damage that actually occurs, so they ensure that the maximum damage actually occurs, so magnify the impacts in disadvantage 1. And then our disadvantage 3 is a cost argument, and what we advocate is plutonium is an expensive element. So our ASA point is the uniqueness. Plutonium is very expensive, and for us to fund lots and lots of plants that have to use that fuel, that will increase the cost of electricity, and that is our link, is that the electrical costs will go up for the American consumer. And so our internal link, one, is then they don't have a lot of money to continue to spend on various goods, because we're a consumer-driven economy. If you're logically not having a whole lot of, you have to spend a lot of money on your electricity, you're not going to be able to go out and spend your money on a variety of different things. And then our second internal link is that this severely hampers our ability to come out of the prolonged recession that we're experiencing. Consumer spending doesn't actually pick up. People are not putting money back into the economy, and yes.
Will the creation of these plants stimulate like construction jobs, considering these plants take a long time to make?
Well, the point being is that the cost for the individual consumer goes up, and we have a counter plan, so we'll solve for jobs and construction. And so finally, the problem with a low American economy is that when the economy's not chugging, people don't have jobs. When people don't have jobs, their quality of life goes down, their ability to feed their family goes down, people begin to starve. It puts an extreme strain on social services, so we have to cut back spending on education and healthcare. More people die from lack of healthcare. We lose a lot of the economical benefits that they were talking about in their plan because of the fact that we are no longer competitive because we can't fund an educational system. So this takes apart their argument on an economy. I got you, Toby. So our counter plan, and that is the United States will provide grants, investment, and subsidies on the use of thorium nuclear energy. I repeat, the United States federal government will provide grants, investments, and subsidies on thorium nuclear energy. We achieve competitiveness through net benefits, which we will go over, and additionally, it's not practical to support different nuclear fuels because you want to be as competitive as you can in the world, and so going all in on one is better to maintain competitiveness. So our net benefits is we know link to our disadvantages because thorium nuclear energy decreases the risk of meltdown. It's a very stable element. It's not unstable like plutonium. It also doesn't link to the terrorism argument because it's a very stable argument, or it's a very stable element. We don't link to the expensive disadvantage because, I'm sorry, we're running out of time. Because thorium is very abundant and doesn't require a whole lot to refine it. And lots of it are inside the United States right now. Wired magazine estimated that it only costs $250 million per gigawatt of electricity for thorium, while it costs roughly $2.5 billion for a normal nuclear plant. So it's very cost effective, and that doesn't link into the cost argument that we have. So just a brief little history with thorium. Thorium was researched in the 1960s. However, in 1972, it was shut down by the United States military because you couldn't use the remains of thorium because it wasn't radioactive enough for weaponry. So the United States military shut it down in 1972, and since then, research hasn't picked up because, as they pointed out, Chernobyl, nobody wanted to research nuclear power anyway. So what we're advocating is a revival of that, and in the 1960s, they accepted the idea that this is totally feasible, that it will work, and that it's a good fuel. So just to go on to their case, so what was their first? Their clean energy argument. We are doing this better because actually we're claiming the impacts to this because we're basically doing the exact same thing. Additionally, we're doing it a little bit better because we're doing things in less of environmental degradation because of the decrease in waste. That thorium has is not as radioactive as plutonium. Onto their second advantage, domination of the nuclear economy, turn this, because they mentioned that plutonium is made elsewhere, is researched and used elsewhere. Thorium is used in no other place in the world. So essentially, if you went with their plan, we'd be starting in the middle of a race, 50 yards behind our opponent. With thorium, we're creating a new race where we start ahead of the opponent. And on 3, the American hedge argument, their oil argument is not unique, and yeah, this is not unique because much of the fuels they're talking about are fuels, not electricity.
Alright, so brief roadmap, I'm going to be going, I guess, right down there, we'll be going over the disadvantages and the counter plan, talk about, and then on to our case. So, starting off right on top, okay, onto their first disadvantage about the meltdown, they talk about how plutonium is an unstable element and how we've had uranium for a while, and that's why we discovered shielding. First of all, we discovered plutonium a really long time ago. It's not like plutonium was some recently discovered element. We've had it for a while. There's really no reason to believe that it's going to cause a meltdown. The only meltdown in a nuclear reactor that's ever happened was in a uranium-powered reactor in Chernobyl. That was due to human error. That was not due to any problem with a meltdown because of the reactor. Right now, like we said, France does have one reactor right now. It's called the Phoenix reactor, and this reactor runs on plutonium. First of all, no meltdown has ever occurred at this reactor, but they only have this one reactor, and I'm going to get into this later in our second advantage about why it's so important that we do this now, that we do, and we get ahead of the race, ahead of France in this in the race. Okay, so basically you can see that they actually don't, because plutonium is just, so first of all, they talk about how plutonium is really unstable, but the thing is, pretty much every element that has an atomic number greater than 83 is an unstable element. Thorium has an atomic number that's big, so it's unstable. So first of all, that's unstable too. That's not actually a problem. So that's really not that much of a problem because we have shielding. Like we know how to shield. We know how to do all these things, and so it's not that big of a deal. We know how to shield from plutonium. We've been using it for a while. Like they said, it's been used in bombs. So if they used it in bombs, they obviously know how to work with it because that requires a very high refinement. So this meltdown argument really doesn't apply here because we do have the technology to do this. So you can't. So they gain none of their impacts there because this meltdown is non-realistic. It's not going to happen. They have no reason to believe that it will happen. Onto their argument about a terrorist attack. Once again, France has a reactor that is running on plutonium right now in the status quo. It has never been the target of a terrorist attack. No nuclear power plant ever has been the target of a terrorist attack, even though uranium is also an unstable element that can cause a meltdown, which is one of the concerns with nuclear energy overall, that all radioactive elements can have a meltdown. And this is why this is also this is really just a generic argument that doesn't apply here, because there's no reason to assume that it will happen. There's no precedent set here, there's nothing going on. So their link is really, like, it just doesn't stand. Furthermore, and I'll get up on this account actually. So onto cost, they talk about how plutonium is an expensive element. However, you don't really need a lot of plutonium, like they said. The reason that because it's unstable, it's very radioactive. When it's that radioactive, that means it gives us a lot of energy. You don't need a lot of it you actually don't need that much of it to power like the United States, and that's what's important here. You're not seeing this. You're not seeing like this expensive, this huge cost because of this. Because you need so little of this plutonium, because it does contain that much energy. So this disadvantage does not apply as well. So none of their disadvantages actually stand here. Onto their arguments. So first of all, onto their specific arguments. They talk about how it's going to stop us from how we don't have our money to spend on goods because it increases the cost of energy. I don't really see why that's true. But because of the subsidies, because of the loan subsidies by the government and these grants, that's going to reduce the cost of energy until plutonium or even the plutonium reactor will be cheaper than what's going on right now with like coal and natural gas, which is electricity. which is what we use for electricity, and the status quo. So you're actually not going to be seeing this increased cost of goods onto their second internal link about how it's going to stop us from exiting the recession. There's really no reason to believe this. They talk about like the construction. First of all, these plants take like 10 to 20 years to build. Like, I'm sorry that we can't fiat them into existence, and that's not realistic. You just can't do that. This is going to create construction jobs that are going to last for 15 to 20 years. That's going to be stimulating the economy, if anything, not hurting it. So you're not seeing this prolongment of the recession that's present according to the negations and disadvantages. All right, so moving on to our opponent's counterplan, the United States federal government will instead just provide the grants and subsidies for thorium reactors. So first of all, our opponents talk about how thorium is very stable, and so even though it might be it's a little bit more stable than plutonium, the main problem with this is that the more stable an element is, the less energy it gives off. Thorium is about like 1/6000 has like 1/6000 the amount of radiation as like plutonium does. We measure this in like chemistry. Plutonium gave off like 6,000 counts per minute, and thorium gave off like 6. Like there's a really, really, really big difference between the amount of energy that's given off between thorium and plutonium. So while it might be stable, while it might be more stable, it has less energy, and this is a big problem for it. Furthermore, even though because it's still radioactive, we can still have a meltdown, no matter how stable it is. Because every element over 83 is radioactive, they still bite this meltdown argument because there can still happen. Like, there still has a half-life, it still occurs. So their counterplan still does bite their disadvantage. Onto their, then they talk about how, once again, that it's not unstable. I already covered that, classify what I said about their first disadvantage, how it applies to their counterplan. Because it's still radioactive, it can still cause this meltdown. You still have all these environmental impacts. Okay, so and they bite into the terrorist thing just as much as we do, because like if we bite into terrorists, so do they, because the terrorists can still attack it. And then of course cost. The main cost for a nuclear reactor doesn't have to do with the energy production itself or the procurement of plutonium, but has to do with the creation of the reactor, which is why we're talking about subsidies for the creation of the reactor. And this means that they bite the reactor just as much. They bite this dissent as well, just as much as we do, because they still have to create these reactors in the first place. Plus, as they said, because they have to develop it from scratch, they're spending more money on research and development, making the cost even higher for thorium reactors. Furthermore, So moving on to the affirmations case here. Our first advantage was about clean energy, and our opponent said that they are solved better because they're just more environmentally friendly and less economic downfalls. However, because thorium provides less energy, you need more of it, you result in more waste. As my opponents conceded, you cannot reuse thorium, meaning that you're going to have a lot more waste, which you're going to have to store somewhere. And this waste itself, because thorium is radioactive in large amounts, this radiation will also seep into the environment, meaning that they're going to see a much larger environmental impact, because while they claim that our disadvantage to the environment was a potential meltdown, their disadvantage is guaranteed, because they're definitely going to have this waste, because thorium cannot be recycled. So therefore we win on clean energy, so we get that. So we basically solve this better than the affirmations plan solves this better than the negations counterplan does. Onto our second advantage about the American economy and how it overtakes, on how we can use it to overtake things. So our opponents talk about how we're starting behind these other countries. But first of all, Japan only produces 2 of these core parts a year. That's not that much. If we put our infrastructure to this, if we actually tried, we could easily overtake these 2 parts made per year. It's not like we're starting that far behind. Furthermore, France only has 1 operating IFR reactor at this point, so we can still develop it. There's still more developments to be made. We can still get ahead of these countries in the race for nuclear energy. Also, our opponents talk about how thorium is used nowhere else in the world. Maybe there's a reason for that. The reason that thorium isn't used anywhere else in the world is because it's horribly inefficient, because it doesn't give nearly as much energy as even uranium does, which plutonium is more efficient than. So there's really so that's why you're not seeing thorium being used in the world, because it's completely and totally inefficient. And onto our third advantage about American hegemony. Our opponents talk about how this is non-unique because all the things were fuel. However, as I talked about natural gas, which we actually do import from Russia and other places like that in Eastern Europe, and from Canada, these are sources of fuel that we are forced to import from other countries. So this argument definitely does apply here. So you have to flow through all our impacts on this, that we gain hegemony, and because we solve for all of we gain all the impacts better than the thorium reactors do because of efficiency, that you have to vote for the affirmation this round, because we got away on all the impacts of the counterplan. Thank you.
So, to roadmap, I'm going disad, the unstable, or our first disad, unstable plutonium, second disad, terrorist attack, third, cost, and then I'm going to go over their advantages, clean energy, get ahead of nuclear race, and the American head. Okay. So, do it again. Essentially, our first disad is that plutonium's unstable, and they said, well, thorium's unstable also. Yet we can't group every single radioactive element equally. To treat that, that would be a very naive statement that essentially says that every element above 84, I believe was the atomic number they said, is completely equal in all ways. They simply, another thing they brought up was that measuring radiation from both the elements, that essentially they're saying uranium, or plutonium is 6,000 times more effective than thorium. If it is 6,000 times, then it sounds like plutonium 6,000 times more unstable, 6,000 times more likely of a meltdown. They said that there's only been one meltdown due to human error, yet there has been a meltdown in history. Just because something hasn't occurred doesn't mean that that it can't occur in the future. That's a very naive statement, assuming that we're essentially stuck in the current situation. Plutonium is a more unstable element than thorium that we're looking at. Therefore, we have essentially net benefits there because plutonium is more unstable. Going on to their second disad, or our second disad, which is a terrorist attack. Essentially, they said France has never been targeted. There's never been any other specifics. Again, that's simply a naive statement to say that because something hasn't happened. For instance, a great example is 9/11. There wasn't a time before that terrorist organizations hijacked commercial jets and flew them into buildings as a terrorist plot. That doesn't mean we can't assume that it's going to happen. We have to, essentially, to be smart, we have to leave those options open. Yes?
So can we assume that aliens are going to land from outer space because it hasn't happened yet?
If you want to start arguing about aliens, go ahead, bring it up in your speech. That's fine with me. So simply, thorium is less likely. Thorium essentially cannot be weaponized as uranium, as plutonium can. That is the reason that terrorists are not going to be going after thorium reactors versus uranium or plutonium reactors. That thorium cannot be weaponized. That's also the reason that it was shut down, because thorium is simply limited energy and it can't be also used as weapons. Third disad is essentially cost. What they said was that you don't need a lot of plutonium. Okay, but plutonium is still really, really, really expensive. The cost is still increased. They said that it's going to be offset by subsidies. Then again, they also said that it takes 10 to 20 years to build. So the advantages that they claim on clean energy, the advantages that they claim on dominating the economy, going off of their advantages, none of those can be brought across. They can't, essentially, they don't start reaping these advantages for 10 to 20 years. So cost effective, it isn't cost effective until maybe 20 years, and even then it's questionable. Yes?
How quickly are thorium reactors built?
Thorium reactors are built much quicker. Instead of a couple square miles, which is required for a uranium reactor, which has to have cooling towers, or plutonium reactors, thorium reactors can be housed in essentially a large house. They're much smaller and can be built much, much faster. Thorium is more common. Thorium is easier to find. Plutonium is not. It's harder to refine. It has to be mined. That's a more expensive process. Therefore, we hold cost benefits specifically in relation to the creation of the reactor, whereas plutonium reactors need huge amounts of essentially space and land. Thorium reactors can be done on a much, much smaller scale. So now to go on case, or to go off case onto their first advantage, which was clean energy. They said that thorium can't be reused. Essentially, that was their main refutation of why we can't claim that advantage. But thorium can be reused. Thorium can be recycled just as plutonium, except for it's not as radioactive. The difference is plutonium, once you still do have that little bit of leftover, you have to be very, very careful with how that's handled. Thorium is not going to have that, and thorium also has a shorter half-life. Therefore, we aren't going to see environmental effects going out for tens, if not hundreds of thousands of years. So you can claim tens, if not hundreds of thousands of years, therefore, environment free of radioactive material. Yes?
So, how is it that it has a shorter half-life, but it's less radioactive than plutonium? Because it's usually the other way around. So how does that work exactly?
I'm not a nuclear scientist, so I don't know all the specifics of thorium. So I can't explain that to you specifically. I don't know the math on everything. I just know that thorium does have a shorter half-life okay, maybe it doesn't have a short half-life. A better way to put it would, because it doesn't, the amount of time for it to become, or to stop being radioactively dangerous to the environment is less. That's a simpler way to put it. Moving on to their second advantage, which was that essentially by investing in this, the United States can pass France, can pass Japan. They said essentially that France and Japan are moving very, very slowly, that France has only one reactor, Japan produces these parts twice a year. I think there's a reason so, because this stuff takes a long time. They themselves said it takes 10 to 20 years to build these reactors. You can't be like the US is like, we're gonna pour $50 billion, and next year we have reactors that are 5th generation IFR reactors. That doesn't happen. This race is, as my partner brought up, this race has already been started and continued by France and Japan, and the US has to play catch up. And it's not like we can simply take steroids and run ahead of everyone else. France and Japan have very smart, very intellectual people, and they obviously have done the research, they've done the science. The US has to play catch up. If the US invests in thorium, which they essentially questioned our whole validity of our argument by saying, well, why hasn't anyone else done it? Simply, we explained that the US military, which essentially was in control of the whole nuclear program relating to energy, said, we don't want thorium because it's not weaponizable. And thorium isn't prevalent in other places around the globe. So the US essentially has a market gain on that. And therefore, that is the basic reasons to go against their second question, which was, why isn't thorium used? We have the reserves, we have the resources, we just haven't invested in technology because the military doesn't find it interesting. Their third advantage was American hegemony. They decided that we will reduce our use of natural gas from Russia. Martin brought up this was unique. The fact is this doesn't work, because if we have more local power, if we essentially get more electricity from reactors in the United States, instead of importing natural gas, we decrease essentially the money that we pay to Russia. We decrease that trade relationship, and that is not a good thing. To an extent, trade is good. We can't, of course, be like completely in debt to another country, but to have a global economy that's healthy, we need to have that trade. We can't just say, we're going to bring everything inside of our borders in order for our own safety, because that's not the way it works. We have to be interconnected. If we really want to ensure safety, if we really want hegemony, then we have to be willing to trade. So their example of natural gas, simply by us buying natural gas, we help out the Russians, and so we help out our economy, and so we are furthering hegemony. So we turn their argument. And so for those reasons, I urge a negation of today's resolution.
Okay, so I'm just gonna go, just to roadmap a little bit, I'm just gonna go disadvantage 1, disadvantage 2, disadvantage 3, advantage 1, advantage 2, advantage 3. So fairly simple. Okay, so we're ready. Okay, so on the disadvantage 1, we feel that we still garner the impacts, all offense on this argument, because we effectively linked out of it with thorium, because thorium is not as unstable as plutonium, and therefore, because it's not as unstable as plutonium, there's a decreased chance of a nuclear meltdown. When you have an element that is 6,000 times more radioactive than another, you are increasing the chance of the meltdown, because there's a lot of potential energy there, and the fact is that we're messing with that extremely potent, extremely powerful amount of energy. Represents the fact that it makes the entire reaction more unstable, and so therefore we feel that our impacts on the meltdown argument completely flow through because of this argument with plutonium will produce a more unstable reaction. Additionally, I believe we covered the fact that thorium recycles just like plutonium does. Thorium does not provide a whole lot of waste. Its waste is not very radioactive because it already starts out less radioactive than plutonium. It takes less of the time for it to become basically less radioactive. So we are completely winning on the meltdown argument, and you can cross-apply much of this argument to the terrorist attack argument. So once again, most of the impacts here completely flow through the debate round. We have the degradation of the environment, we have an increased degradation of the environment, we have increased water contamination, we have the increased chance that people die. Additionally, terrorists innovate. Like, once again, my partner brought up, there was no precedent for flying planes into buildings before 9/11. They're going to bring up that we can't predict things that terrorists do. Like they brought up the alien question. The fact is that it's completely reasonable to assume that non-governmental organizations would attack a very vulnerable part, a very destructive, potentially destructive part of our economy. That's completely reasonable. That's why the trade towers were targeted, because they were a very potent, very powerful part of our economy. On their disadvantage 3, we win the impacts of this and their economy advantage quicker because we went on time frame. We mentioned the fact that thorium plants take less years to build, so therefore we are accessing the construction jobs and the economical benefits quicker. So we're winning on time frame. That's a very big reason to vote for us for any sort of economy argument, because we're going to be able to implement it quicker. Specifically because a lot of the research, a lot of the work has already been done. Because in the 1960s we did a lot of that research, and all we have to do, there's been a few scientists that have been tinkering around with it, and all we have to do is just continue that work, continue to build on that work that has already been done, and so we will win on time frame because we will build it quicker. So on their clean energy argument, cross-apply much of the arguments that we had on the first disadvantage and the second disadvantage, because the waste recycles just like plutonium, so we won't have environmental degradation. Additionally, we went on time frame for the domination of the nuclear economy because we're starting the race, so we are able to dominate that field much quicker than plutonium. Additionally, we have the thorium reserves, and that's why nobody else has done it to this point. So we went on time frame, we turned this by going to thorium. You quickened the domination of that aspect, and then on the American hedge argument, turn that because what you will see is a decrease in American hedge because Russia will be very mad that we're no longer buying its natural gas. And when you anger very prominent members of the international community, your hegemony goes down because they don't like you.
Using Prime Minister's privilege to extend some arguments here, not new ones. Then I'll be going over 3.
Extend where? So we know which sheets of paper to look at.
Oh, right, okay. I'll be going over the first and second disadvantage, their counter plan. Then I'll be going over our first 2 advantages to this plan. Okay then, everyone ready? Okay, then to get right into this, I'd like to thank everyone finally for being here. Now then, on their first and second disadvantage here, okay, one of the key things that their second speaker basically put out, and this is their only straw, we gave logical reasons of why this will happen, why it won't happen, what will stop it. Their second speaker, their best argumentation is that it could happen, and that's why we should stop it. That's it. They didn't give any examples. They didn't give proof. They didn't give a single actual logical moment where it leads you from the link to the impact. They simply said any hypothetical possibility should stop this from happening. And if you're weighing political decisions of what could mean the future of the United States energy, if we simply say, well, something good, bad can happen to everything. If we use this mentality, it freezes things. It provides for no progress. So on these 2 disadvantages, you shouldn't win on this because they're effectively just saying there's a possibility for anything bad, we freeze it, we can't do it. Now then, moving on to their counterclaim. This is a huge issue that I'll be talking about in voter issues. Their second speaker, they refuted the disadvantage to try and stick them to our case. But he never refuted the fact that every single one of their 3 disadvantages is bitten by their counterplan. Their counterplan links into all of them. That completely flows across the flow. So when you're looking at net benefits here, those are not unique to simply the AFT plan. Every single one applies to the next counterplan, and you should weigh that in this round for net benefits. Now then, Okay, now moving into the clean energy one, they said less, they talked mostly about less less half-life and how it is sitting in the environment for shorter time. Okay, really looking on here and what my partner was trying to get into here. Okay, here's what happens when you have less half-life. Okay, we've already stated before that there's more of it in the environment because there's more waste. They didn't refute that, so that stands. We know that there's more of it in the environment. But less half-life effectively means that it doesn't mean it's less radioactive. That's not how radiation works. It means it dumps it all out faster. It can be just as radioactive, but suddenly instead of having this less amount of fuel that is radioactive for a long period of time and is manageable and controlled, thorium, you have a large amount and it dumps it out quickly. This means that their arguments of poisoning the water or poisoning the environment, they're non-unique to simply our case. They apply to their case. They only have it more of it and it happens faster to the environment, which means they don't win this argument. Now then, moving on to, I believe, our third disadvantage here. They're talking about they're talking about we want the trade out there. Going on, they brought this up and like Russia will get angry at us. Okay, we're talking about Russia on this point then. The Russia point was a new thing, but as well, Russia has a nasty habit, if we're talking about it, of cutting natural gas off for more hegemony to themselves. So this isn't simply trade that's good. We're relying on countries, the Middle Eastern countries. We're relying on Russia. We're relying on countries that generally don't have our best interest in mind, and it has more of a bad effect on us than it has a good effect. So they do not win this argument. Now then, moving on to some three big voter issues for this round of what you should look at the scope of the round. Right then, the first thing is, as I said before, in net benefits wise, the counter plan, you have to weigh it on an equal level with all the disadvantages that the negation ran out. They never refuted, never showed why their counter plan doesn't. So effectively, when you're weighing this, both you have to look at it with all the disadvantages if you still believe that their disadvantages tie into ours. Now then, my second voter issue here, and this is a big one. Now once you realize that both have these disadvantages, we need to look at short-term versus long-term. The affirmation provides you for a long-term solution in the world. They continue to say thorium reactors are shorter-term. Thorium reactors are more quickly made. But if we look at the long-term of the arguments, thorium reactors are worse for the environment. They dump radiation out more quickly. They have more fuel that dumps this radiation out. So they're short-term on that. Job-wise, they don't create jobs for as long. Thorium reactors, they aren't as efficient. That's why they're easier to build, which means that effectively they have this quick buildup, not long amount of construction, which means that effectively that's why they don't get this. So for longer, more efficient clean energy in the long term that keeps us competitive, it's going with the affirmation, IFR reactors or plutonium. So this is what you're seeing here. That if you look at it with both disadvantages, the AF wins on long term, which is a huge thing here since both fight it. Which is going to be some point my third big voter issue for why the affirmation has won this round is looking at just the criterion, net benefits. Okay, we've shown you. Thorium is not as good of a long-term solution. It bites all the disadvantages, and it doesn't achieve all of the advantages that the affirmations plan gets. So when you look at net benefits of what's happened in this round, you see that the affirmation provides longer-term energy, more efficient energy, and energy that gets us ahead in the world. So for these reasons, I urge a strong vote in favor of the affirmation of this round. Thank you all for being here.